Brutal, disgusting, heartbreaking, haunting. 4 words often used to describe the stories of R.J. Powell. I've only read a handful of her books so far, but I can tell you that they seem to be so far short, visceral, and horrifying. Today, I want to talk to you about the 8 Cases of Jane. Hi, I'm Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really glad you're here because I am going to tell you all about it. So this is the story of Jane. She is an older teen who happens to be a serial killer. She's meeting with a psychiatrist in order to tell her story. In other words, what happened to those people she killed? What led her to it? Why did she do it, if there's a reason? And then exactly what she did do. The questions we're faced with are, is this a case of DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called, or used to be referred to as multiple personalities, a diagnosis that is still considered controversial. Is this somehow a case about possession? Was Jane in control when these things happened? Was she not? Was she not in control because she's lost her mind or for other reasons? Like, there's just crazy. And why is there a different name for each of the women she became to end the life of each she killed? Names like Lilith, Jezebel, Delilah, Zeluka, Athalia. Any of these sound familiar? You know where they come from? Jane tells the doctor that she is there because she has killed a lot of people. But the doctor starts with Jane's personal information. She first met her husband when she was a student in his English class in high school. She says all the girls thought he was hot, but she assures the psychiatrist they didn't start dating until after she graduated from high school. She knew her parents wouldn't like it, but she also knew that they would get used to it, and she describes Eric as the love of her life. He has a son, Jeremiah, who is 3 years older than Jane, but Jane says she loves him like her very own boy. Okay, so we start, of course, with the first murder, and that's of a neighbor that she used to hang out with in high school. Someone, she used to go over there and they'd get high or they'd hang out or whatever, and she goes over there, and when they get there, they go over to his garage, to hang out, and she sees a lead pipe, so she hits him over the head with it. It doesn't knock him completely out, though, but he does get confused and weak. She ties him up with duct tape because it happens to be there, and then takes a large knife that she thinks is probably for cutting up fish, and she starts to flay him. One arm, then the other, down to his legs. She asks the doctor if he's ever seen a human kneecap without skin on it. And of course, he's gone through medical school, so of course he has. That's a very unnerving question. Finally, she flays his face. She says that it was hard to get off. It wanted to stay on. But then she also says that it was really funny to see the look on her neighbor's face when she had his face on her face looking at him. And his eyes were just bugging out. She says then she put the knife into his neck because she felt bad and wanted him to die already. Okay, so here's your first victim, but the details of the first victim aren't over yet because the doctor says, "Did you do something with his skin?" She says, "Well, yeah, I gathered it all up and I took it back to my house. I treated it like it was pork meat and put it in the stew that night." She reports that Eric and Jeremiah both seemed to love it. She ate some too. Okay. So her next victim, so this is victim number 2, was an ex-coworker of hers, one who had made promises to her before going off with that other girl, which is why Jane decided he should die. So basically they used to date, and he got over her or whatever and started dating someone else. So she was like, okay, this is the next one. The doctor asks Jane if she's aware of the fact that this kid's girlfriend is now missing, but Jane says that she has no idea where the girlfriend is. The doctor asks how it was that she and her second victim met up on the day she killed him, and Jane says that she called him to meet up with her because she had a gift for him. And when the doctor asks, well, what was the gift? Jane replies, death. She explains that he drives a big truck, and he had to lift her up into the cab, the only way for her to get into the cab. And he did so that day. And when inside the cab, she handcuffed him to the steering wheel. Jane reports it wasn't easy, that her second victim actually punched her in the nose. She got all bloody. She had to tell Eric she fell down the stairs, but once she had him handcuffed, she was able to take her knife out and tell him to put the car into drive. She had asked him to meet her at the lake on purpose. He drove his truck directly into the lake. Jane jumped out of the car, slammed the door. She explains that it was difficult for him to open the window because it was rolled down and he was in a very awkward position. Then she asks the doctor if he's ever watched anyone drown, because Jane, at this point in the story, jumped into the lake after the truck sank to watch. She says she swam over to the truck and watched him as he tried to hold his breath. She put the goggles on that she had brought with her so she could see better. She said he tried to hold his breath for as long as he could, but eventually he couldn't, so he took in a great deal of water, vomited a little, and then after convulsing a few times, died. She also brought a small jar with her, along with the goggles, that she was able to catch some of the vomit lake water in. She made another stew. Okay, so that's our first two cases, right? Here, the doctor is going to ask her about the well. The well is not one of the cases. He says he wants to know about her history. So it turns out that when she was 8 years old, she fell down a well. She says that somehow she managed to survive and that no one forced her into the well. She seems really put off by the questioning, so the doctor changes the subject and leads her to the third victim. And she says she didn't know him like she knew the other two. That one night at 3 a.m., she drove to his house, went in the back door, which was unlocked, and let herself in. And the doctor says, well, how did you know that the door was unlocked? She said, it just was. Just looked out. Coincidence. So once she was in the house, she went to the garage, and she got the hose from the shop vac. And after tying up the victim to his bed, she pushed the tube into his mouth all the way down to his stomach. She started with 8 cans of beans, then all the cans of peas, then all the bread in the house, which was washed down with a gallon of milk. She reports that he started to cry right away. Then he started vomiting. When he did that, she would scoop it right up, and after saving a cup for herself, I'm sure you know what she's going to do with it, the rest would go back into the tube and back into the boy where it was supposed to be. She says that his belly started to distend and then got bruised, that he took the longest to die, probably because of the vomiting. She took a cup of vomit home, made another stew. She and her family ate it. The doctor then asks her why she brings home part of her victims for her and her family to eat, but she doesn't answer. Instead, she becomes distracted. Once focused again, he asks Jane why her third victim needed to die, and she responds, he was a sinner. Then she mentions what was under his bed. Did you see what was under his bed? Have you read that part of the report, doctor? He had, but how did she know that there were pictures and a camera under his bed with pictures of things there you should not have pictures of? He was a sinner. Jane cannot tell the doctor, or won't tell the doctor, how it is she knows. She begins to get a little more animated. She's explaining that Eve was punished for eating 1 apple. But her third victim had taken the apple, planted a tree, taken all the apples so that his sins were so much way worse than Eve's. She starts to pace the room. She stands in front of the doctor, growling. He yells at her to sit down, but she doesn't. Finally, he stands up and he yells her name. Her demeanor changes. She smiles and says, let's move on. Meanwhile, a large storm is starting outside, and the snow is coming down pretty heavily right now. She won't sit down, and the doctor asks her about the sweater she's wearing. Her brother got it for her. It says, "Pretty girls read horror." She says, and it's true. He says, "Is that your favorite genre?" She says, "Well, I love to read, but horror is definitely my favorite." The first three cases, she says that she got help. The first one, she got help from Lilith. Then she got help from Jezebel. And then this third one, the guy that she compares to the apples, Eve helped her with that one. Next, he asks about Christmas. She says it was snowing then too, and that Zalika took care of him. When asked, she says that Zalika is one of the women inside her. Jane says that she wasn't feeling well that night, so she sent Eric to have Christmas Eve dinner at his mom's house. It worked out well because his mom doesn't really like her. So it left the evening open for her to play with her old boss, victim 4. She describes him as a dirty old man who can't keep his hands to himself. She once walked in on him pleasuring himself to the training video that featured an old lady. Ugh. But that wasn't really the reason she killed him. It was because of what he did to a coworker of Jane's. He straight up R-worded her. The police were no help, as per usual. So Jane called up her ex-boss and invited him over to her place for a friend's Christmas Eve dinner. She says she wore the same dress that she wore on the first day of her honeymoon. When victim 4 arrived at her house, she got him a drink. Whiskey. With a bunch of trazodone thrown in there for good measure. It took him about 30 minutes to pass out, and then she got him into the bathtub and waited. It wasn't until he began to stir that she got to work. She took Eric's hammer. She started with his fingers. Smashed them so that the bones weren't broken. They were demolished, destroyed. So first the fingers, then hands, then arms. Now, by the time she reached his shoulders, he was crying and, sort of jostling and jolting with each strike. She reports that eventually she slit his wrists and drained his blood, and of course she took 2 cups of blood. But she put that one in the stew for the boys. She put one in the stew for the boys, and the other, she tells the doctor, it's not time to know where that went yet. But the doctor says, no, you're incorrect. It's time to tell me everything because you've been caught. Jane still acts like she has the upper hand. She seems to change the subject, asking the doctor if he has ever read the Dead Sea Scrolls, or if he knows how oracles were made. She won't tell him, just suggests that he do some research during their next break. During the break, the doctor calls a colleague of his named Jack. He's a priest. He's a good friend of his. He tells him about Jane and how she has been invoking biblical names and asking about oracles and prophets. The doctor thinks that Jack, being a man of the cloth, could be very helpful. The doctor agrees to try and stall Jane until Jack can get there. It will probably take him about an hour. The doctor then does some reading on oracles. According to ancient lore, oracles were chosen by divine intervention, bestowed with a sacred task that tested their very essence. The ritual was stark in its simplicity. They were given a cake and thrown into a cave. If they dropped the cake, it signified sudden death. Yet, if they endured the darkness of the cave for 3 days and 3 nights, they emerged as conduits of the stories of the dead, and their revelations carried the weight of prophecy. The doctor asks Jane if it's okay that his colleague joins in, and she says that's fine. Then she asks about her cousin, but quickly pivots back to the well incident. She was at a birthday party. It was just after Misty blew out the candles, and Jane had her cupcake. She remembers falling, climbing out, but doesn't really remember being in the well. She does remember everyone being very impressed. She did not drop her cupcake. The doctor asks about Misty. Jane says she was a friend until she wasn't. Just a mean girl, but she's dead now because she fell into a meat grinder. And she's smiling and laughing. And she says, that's how I got the idea for my cousin. At first I was like, well, you started to ask about the cousin and then you went to the well and now, I see. Okay, we were getting her to the cousin. So Jane tells the doctor how her uncle, the father of this cousin, used to, the word she uses, diddle her as a kid, and that his son, Chad, was not very far off from that same fate. She admits that Chad never really hurt her beyond making some strange advances when they were kids. She called him up and said that they should meet at a cafe in town and then walk over to the park. There was construction going on, and they stopped next to the wood chipper to talk about how disgusting it would be to find a body spread out everywhere. She says that she turned it on and pushed him in. The doctor says, was it really that easy? And she says, oh no. But Thalia overpowered him. He hit Jane in the face, but she managed to push his hand into the chipper. I mean, once it was in, he was already down to his elbow. And then she literally kicked his ass, and he was stuck in the chipper. He was screaming for a little bit while bits were sent flying into the air. She is straight up gleeful when she reports that the snow was as bright as the red of Santa's rosy cheeks. When he asks what she took from him, from this her fourth victim, the response is mush. But this time it didn't go in the stew. You see, Eric had gotten into smoothies, so she put it into a smoothie. She even called it a Chad smoothie, but it went completely over the boys' heads. Knock on the door. Father Jack is here. The two men embrace, and then they go into the doctor's office for a quick talk. First, the father lets the doctor know who the biblical ladies are that Jane has been mentioning. We all know who Eve and her sin was, right? But Althea was the daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. She murdered an entire family to secure her place on the throne. And when her son died, she manipulated everything so that she would be the queen. A little Cersei Toman-esque. Really creepy. But, you know, in the Bible, so it depends on how real you think those things are. Jezebel was famous for orchestrating the death of Naboth in order to acquire land for her husband. And Jezebel has just become sort of synonymous with untrustworthy woman, right? At the least. Delilah was the woman Samson was in love with, but she betrayed him and gave him to the Philistines. And Zeluka was Potiphar's wife. To remind you, Potiphar was the rich man in Egypt that purchased Joseph, like Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat Joseph, to work as a slave in his house. His wife, this is the wife, found him to be very attractive, and she made advances, but he rebuffed her. He said no. So she accused him of attempting sexual relations with her. It's how he ended up in jail, which ultimately turned out to be a good thing because that's where he was when he was able to interpret the king's dreams, but that's not really part of this story. So, those are the women that she's been invoking, and they're all from biblical times, and they're all women of power and women of infamy, right? They're famous for not things that they would necessarily women should be proud of. These are women who are famous for bad reasons, right? They killed someone, or they manipulated someone, or they, these terrible things that women do, right? The doctor says that he's beginning to think that the whole thing is just for show, that there are no alternatives, that there's no DID, and that he could really use Father Jack sitting in there with his knowledge of these women. It will be very, very helpful. So when the doctor introduces Jane to the father, Jane, suggests that they play a game. She says that it's her turn to ask questions. She's been answering questions all day. She asks if the father thinks that she is a good girl. And when he says, I'm sure there are definitely parts of you that are absolutely good. We all have good in us, right? And then she says, well, do you think I'm evil? And he says, well, I believe that you have engaged in some, evil things or made some not good choices. But then she looks at the doctor and she says, since I've been here, how many times have you pictured me naked? He assures her that never, not once, is the answer. She tells him, yeah, you might not be that kind of evil, but he still has a head full of sins. And that the women inside her allow her to see all of men's sins. And his sin is that he, our lovely doctor here, happens to be in love with Father Jack. And while Jane doesn't really care about homosexuality at all, God doesn't seem to be okay with it. Or, most likely, Father Jack. To release some of the tension in the room, the father asks Jane what she means when she says she has evil inside her. But before she can answer, she stands, fixes her gaze at the ceiling, and lets out a croaking, toad-like sound, followed by mechanical laughter. The doctor reminds her that Father Jack asked a question, and she begins to tell them about the 7 women inside her. It stops. She says if she calls them by name, they'll come forward, and she is not ready for that. They still have the next case to discuss. Another stormy, snowy day. She had just made stew for the boys. After dinner, she asked Eric to meet her upstairs. After dinner, Eric and Jeremiah, they were just both so sleepy. And she asks the doctor if he can guess why. And he says, did you throw a handful of trazodone in it like last? But she says, oh, you're so smart. You got it. Absolutely. But not just that. She included remnants of all of her victims, as well as some of her own period blood. She says that her stew was like its own little totem. Oh my God, this girl. She says Eric willingly came upstairs with her, but he was so sleepy that he didn't fight when she tied him to the bed. Then she did what needed to be done. When asked to clarify, Jane says she called on the women, that she didn't want to kill her husband, but it wasn't really up to her. It was the women in control of her, or leading her, not so much controlling her. So first, she removed Eric's eyes with spoons. She says he really didn't like it, but he really deserved it. She knew because he had told her that one of his students years ago, he had R-worded, like straight up R-worded. And it was because they'd gotten into a fight and she'd really pissed him off. And, you know, she was one of the girls that he was sleeping with. He's slept with many, many girls over the years. I mean, that's why he became a high school teacher. Which is when she does admit to the doctor, yes, my husband was a groomer, and yes, he groomed me. Then we find out that the girl he was sleeping with before Jane is missing. When the doctor pushes, she admits that Eric killed her, the girl that was missing. Then she tells them where the body's buried, and one of the deputies heads out into the storm to see if the information is accurate. After Eric's eyes were gone, she took a knife to his tongue. Then she drove the knife into his throat. His son had fallen asleep on the couch downstairs. She walked over to him without waking him and slit his throat. She called it cathartic. Then she made another stew with antelope meat that Eric had hunted. Tomato, garlic, onion, eyeballs, tongue, and blood. She ate it over her famous cornbread. She starts to describe what eating eyeballs is like, and it causes the doctor to vomit into his wastebasket. Father Jack says they need to take a break, but Jane says, no, we're almost at the best part. Father Jack runs out of the room, comes back with a, wet cloth, and he starts to, help the doctor sort of clean up a little. He says, fine, I'll play along, Jane. Who was it that killed Eric and your stepson? And she looks at the priest and she says, the Witch of Endor. When the doctor is able to look up at Father Jack, he sees sheer terror on his face. The light overhead starts to flicker. The doctor asks who the Witch of Endor is, and the father says, she was a necromancer in the Hebrew Bible, but she was also known in other ancient texts. She was also an oracle. To which Jane responds, what do you mean was? I still am. Father Jack's lips move to form the words, we need to leave, but suddenly he freezes as the power goes out while the winds and snow are battering the building. Jane is standing behind Father Jack, He tries to say something but can't. Then he crumples to the floor. He whispers, "I'm sorry," to the doctor, and then the light completely disappears from his eyes. Looking up at Jane, the doctor can see that she is now holding Father Jack's heart in her hand. There's a hole in the father's back. Jane looks at the doctor and tells him Father Jack didn't really love him. I mean, he would have if you had been like significantly younger. Then the doctor watched as the disembodied heart thudded its last thud. Then she brought the heart up to her lips and began to eat it. She announces that she has now killed 8 people, and the doctor asks who she is. She responds that she has already told him that she's the Witch of Endor, and she wants revenge. Then she tells him that she's so glad that he brought in his friend, the priest. Otherwise, she would have had to kill the doctor. I mean, there needed to be 8. Jane then starts to chant the names of the women. The room begins to heat up, and Jane's body starts to twitch. She continues to intone the names of the biblical women. The doctor smells sulfur. Jane reaches out her arms, tilts her head back, opens her mouth, closes her eyes, and a guttural sound emanates from deep, deep within her. The storm outside is raging, and the window frame begins to tremble. Then the window shatters, sending glass and soaring into the room, which is when the doctor hears footsteps coming down the hall. A very loud thump, thump, thump. The fear inside the doctor is too much, but he can't look away. The steps get louder and louder and closer, and the doctor watches the doorway, and Jane floats into the air, and the snow swirls around her, and her shadows become a montage of women. Then 2 figures enter the room. 2 dark figures. The doctor has pressed himself into the corner of the room, and the 3 figures start to come towards him together. Jane tells the doctor not to be afraid and not to disappoint her boys, which is when he realizes that the 2 figures before him are Eric and Jeremiah, and they reek of death. Of course they do. They're corpses. Jane chants loudly the names of the women. She announces that she is all the women who have ever been wronged, will be wronged, and who will commit wrongs against men. And then everything stops. The wind, the snow, the chanting, the thundering, it all stops, and Jane says, "We are here to take back what's ours." Then the 2 walking corpses approach the doctor, each taking the side of his head and holding it still. Jane walks over to him and asks if he wants to be her puppet. Before he can respond, she's leaning over and putting her mouth onto his. Searching out his tongue, she bites down and begins to eat. She announces that her boys don't speak. Then she reaches behind him, grabs the back of his neck, penetrates his skin with her nails, and severs his spinal column. His useless body is dragged to the other side of the room, and he listens as the 3 communicate with grunts and guttural sounds. Doesn't even really sound like a language. Meanwhile, he's thinking, that bitch ate my tongue. The last thing he remembers from that night was her saying goodnight, the 2 men reaching out for him, and everything going black. Then he tells us that it's been 2 years since the incident, that he's paralyzed below the neck, and it isn't easy, but he's adjusted. Today feels different somehow, because Jane reached out. She's got a task for him. He's skeptical about seeing her again, but he has some questions he'd really like answered. He then tells us that if he's able to update this book, he will, but it'll be later. Finally, he says, if this is the end, please know that whatever pain I am inflicting, it is not truly me. Finally, the book ends with a line that says that Dr. Lippens was never seen or heard from ever again. Wow. Wow. I was blown away. The use of the biblical characters, so cool and accurate, really, really accurate, which I thought was awesome. Like that was just the neatest thing. And like I could really even almost picture what was going on in that office when like the storm was raging and she was floating and these corpses come walking in and all this stuff is happening. This might actually make a really good movie if someone knew what they were doing. If they didn't know what they were doing, they'd probably mess it up, as is true with most horror stories. Am I right? Anyway, this was one of those books that my jaw would drop, and like someone who was like near me when I was reading it was like, "Are you okay?" Oh yeah, this book is just blowing my mind. And I had a lot of fun reading it. There were times when it was really, really gross, like the descriptions of eating the eyeball, and then like what she does to that one boy when she like fills him with food so that he like basically bursts, like real gross. And the fact that she puts the stuff in the food, and there's a couple of diagrams in like sort of like pen line drawings, but they're of like stew. Are real disturbing. But this author definitely has that thing that I like, that disturbing, upsetting, comes with a side of trigger warnings kind of story, and I'm very excited. She started publishing, I believe, in 2024, so she's probably got a lot more she needs to share with us. And her stories, so far, I've only read, I think, 4, but they've been pretty short and sort of like not easy reads in that like I'm bored with what I'm reading, more like it doesn't take too much time. Do you know what I mean? Like I very recently read The Deep. Well, I was with The Deep by Nick Cutter. I was with The Deep for weeks, at the bottom of the Marian Trench. This I read in I think 2 days. So that just makes for a different kind of experience, and I thought it was great and really dark. In fact, there's a couple of the stories I can't tell you about. There's absolutely no way I would be able to put the details of those books on YouTube. Not in a million trillion years, even though I have very few followers and very few people that watch me. So YouTube is not really caring what I do so much. I am quite certain that if I were to cover the details of those books, I don't even know how I would manage to, I don't even know what words I could use, to be honest with you. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But if you're still here, thank you. If you have the time and the inclination, a like or a thumbs up or a comment, or if you are not subscribed, if you could subscribe, that's really, really helpful to me. And take care of yourself. You are precious and important and the only self that you are going to get. I'll catch you next time. Bye. So when in the garage, she got the... Meanwhile, a large storm outside is bright as Santa's rosy cheeks. The doctor thinks that Jack may have, after Eric sees... I'm sorry. Eric can't